B'kiv HaYehudim. So, B'kiv HaYehudim, the Jewish people accepted upon themselves what they had begun to do. What had they started? Starting the giving of the Torah. Why do you say that they started and they've completed giving the Torah? They completed the acceptance of the Torah. Why are we saying that? Because the Gemara tells us that Hashem held the mountain over them and said, accept or else. In theory, someone could have said, it's not a full acceptance, I was coerced into it. Chassidus said the Jewish people were overwhelmed with love. That is the metaphor of this overwhelming love. But even then, I was coerced into it. How can I make a clear decision at a time like that? What is it about Purim that completes the giving of the Torah? So what's so special about it? And we get to this idea that Purim is when they displayed active Mesiras Nefesh. Not just the willingness to sacrifice themselves, but we are ready to sacrifice ourselves for the Torah. And that is considered the completion because it's not just a matter of like, oh yeah, we're doing what we're supposed to be doing because we've kind of been brought up in this. But the fact that they were willing to sacrifice themselves for it, that shows, yeah, we're really committed to this. Mordechai, who's the most rabbin of the generation, brought that out within them. We see that specifically with the way he's teaching the school children. That's the summary of the Friedrich Rebbe's Maamar that the Rebbe asked about. But the general thing that we're looking at is that there's something about Purim and Mesiras Nefesh for Torah that completes the giving of the Torah. I keep saying the giving of the Torah, but it completes the acceptance that was started at the giving of the Torah. The Rebbe has a bunch of questions about this. Number one, when we talk about Mordechai and the school children, that seems a detour of the main point about Mesiras Nefesh. Number two, why are we comparing the physical state of the Jewish people, not just the spiritual state of the Jewish people? Number three, the mitzvahs are v'chai behen. You're supposed to live by them. So why are we talking about Mesiras Nefesh? Also, why is the active Mesiras Nefesh, what is so distinct about that versus the willingness? Wasn't that good enough? And Purim and Hanukkah, 2 times that the Jewish people, they were at risk of keeping Torah, and yet there's something about Purim specifically. We saw texts about Mesiras Nefesh. Ultimately, we get to the point, there's something on Mesiras Nefesh that is critical, even though it's one mitzvah of many, and even though we're supposed to live by the mitzvahs, so something about Mesiras Nefesh and the willingness to die for the mitzvahs that is a distinct factor. That was what was so distinct about Purim. But now to understand this, to get to the answer about the questions, we have to understand what was the whole purpose of the giving of the Torah. It wasn't just to give us the laws. The giving of the Torah was about the fusion. That physical aspect, spiritual aspect, and the fusion of the two. How do you get two opposites to unite? A revelation of something greater than both will unite the two. Remember the Sikha that we did about Avram and Noach and the times that they lived in? Why are we so happy when we talk about Avraham? What it's so joyous? Because Avram ushered in the era of the giving of the Torah when the fusion would happen. So if you remember, part of the things that we spoke about is that Noach, his generation, did he rebuke them enough? Did he not rebuke them enough? And that whole thing is like, well, he lived in a time period where it was very physically oriented. They were limited by the nature of the world kind of idea. Versus the 10 generations before him was just God just giving kind of thing, and it wasn't necessarily the actions of the people down below, which is why we see they just lived a long time and different times that God interceded and things like that. That's Abraham that brings the fusion. So we kind of are a little bit familiar with these ideas, which we're going to see now applied when we have these kind of 3 aspects applied to different areas with Torah mitzvahs. 3 aspects of a mitzvah that become the new reality after the giving of the Torah. Tachton, the lower aspect, physical, stays physical. Whatever's a physical entity, even if it gets elevated, it stays physical. Elyon, the higher aspect, the spiritual becomes spiritual. And then batul, the subjugation, which is like the word of bittul, which is the higher and the lower aspect united. It's like taking it to a whole new level of things. So we saw how that applies in the fulfillment of a mitzvah. There's the lower level, it's habituated by the body and soul. That's what I've trained myself to do. That's why I do things. The higher level is like, oh, not just about whatever I train my body to do. It's about motivated by the love of soul. So soul, I love God so much, so I will do for him. Go above both those levels. It's not just what my body's trained into. I'm still going to do whatever I got to do. It's not just about my love of God, and override that also. We do the mitzvahs because Hashem gave us the mitzvahs, and we are nullified to God. So what God asks from us, we will do, no matter where we are in our own personal journey. So we saw a lot of text about that. Then we got to the 3 approaches to the mitzvah. Mitzvahs were given to refine man in creation. A lot of text about that, about why does Hashem care if we shech like this or like this. Also, we each have our slice of world that we're supposed to refine and elevate. How do we do that? By interacting with the world around us. There's a ripple effect of elevation. That's how we see how it impacts the physical world. Elyon, the higher levels, that mitzvahs were given to walk in God's ways and connect with him at levels above creation. As God does, so do we do. All the things that we saw about how God does the mitzvahs and he commands it to us. Also, as God is compassionate and kind, you be compassionate and kind, mirror God in his attributes. A general idea of the refinement. The next idea of connecting to God, walking in God's ways and connecting above creation. But even that's not still the highest level we could get to. We can still take both of those and go to a new level. And the new level we get to is that we're going to connect to God's essence. Essence is just essence. Whatever you think is the highest level, until we get to essence, we haven't reached what we can reach. Those were all the mitzvahs. Now we see these ideas applied to the motivation for Torah learning. Why am I studying Torah? To benefit the intellect, as in anybody, no matter what their spiritual background is or their spiritual state is someone that can relate to this level. If you're interested in intellectual stuff, study Torah because it feeds the intellect. And then the higher aspect is the soul wants to connect to God. We can see how the first aspect is physical because it's about the intellect. Second one is the soul wants to connect to God. How do we connect connect to God? Through Torah. Torah, remember, is the knot that unites us. But the higher level is the benefit of the Torah. The only motivation for learning is that the Torah must be learned. Not just about the intellect, not just about what the soul wants. It's Torah-oriented, Torah-focused. That's how we get to the higher level. And we saw a text with that. Remember, a lot of that text is what we saw, V'yikhuli Truma, you take me, that we acquire God, and the whole thing with making a room for God. Then we moved on to the next thing. There's 3 approaches to Torah. Tachton, the lower aspect, is that Torah is the wisdom of Hashem, which descends to a level for human intellect. So God's wisdom, we can't connect it. How can we reach it? Through Torah, we can't access it. Remember, that's the waterfall, that the nature of water is to flow up to down. The Torah is all the way up there and it comes down to us down here in a way that we can access and learn it. On the higher aspect is that Torah is a tool and means to connect with Hashem. But the Torah is one with the essence of Hashem. Very similar to what we just saw. Now we get up to the last section of the 3 aspects. And this is what we were in the middle of. So 3 approaches to learning the halacha of the Torah. So not just Torah, but halacha itself. Halacha is God's will. When we say what is the law of things, how are we supposed to do things, that's another way of saying what does God will for this situation to be. What happens if there's an ox that gores people or an animal that's harming people? What does God will? The ox is God's animal. The dog or whatever is God's animal. But what are you supposed to do if it's a danger to humans? It depends. Halacha will tell us what we're supposed to do with this animal now. Tachton, the lower aspect, is that we study with a primary focus on practical halachas. Physically oriented aspect, we saw text for this, we're learning in order to do. So you just got to learn stuff to know practically what am I supposed to be doing. Ellie, on the higher levels, no, it's not just about whatever I need to know. It's also about learning the whole Torah regardless of what the practical application is. So whether or not I need to know exactly how to bring a carbon right now, we don't have sacrifices now, but I'm still going to learn the laws of it because this is God's Torah. That's why we said also that even though the depth of God's Torah is infinite, but practical learning can be done. As in, you can learn the whole Tanakh, you can learn the whole Gemara and Mishnah. And then Bata, what's the highest level? Not just about the halachos, not just about just learning the whole Torah, but to study Torah day and night. So there's not a goal, it's just a constancy. That's not even applicable necessarily to intellect. Because you say, oh, someone doesn't have the intellect necessarily to study the entire Torah. Or they have to train themselves to get that sort of intellect. But if you look at the higher level, it's just no constant Torah study. So it's not a matter of how much or how deep, it's just a matter of always studying Torah. So we saw some text. We're now in the Elyon aspect, which is study the whole Torah regardless of the practical application. We're seeing proof text of these things. So the last thing we did is part from the Gemara about Moshe Rabbeinu and Rabbi Akiva. The Moshe Rabbeinu went up to God. He says, how come you're not giving the Torah yet? You're tying these crowns onto the letters. And Hashem said there's going to be someone, Akiva ben Yosef, Rabbi Akiva, who's going to expound mounds and mounds and mounds of teachings from this. And so Moshe said, so just give the Torah through him. And God says, this is my will. And now we get to the next text. Still within this section. By the way, I was explaining to the other class today, if you would learn the Maamar, you wouldn't see all these texts like this. The Rebbe just goes through different ideas and then just throwing out either quotes or references that now we're seeing, okay, what is this quote and reference that the Rebbe is making? So we're looking now at the text that the Rebbe referenced and pulled from. If we would learn the Maamar straight, it would be much shorter to learn because you're just reading through the text of the Maamar. Here, because we're doing the deep dive into all the sources, but it's good because it takes us all over the Torah. So yay for us. Anyways, Shulchan Aruch Harav means the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. Anyone whose mind and memory are strong enough to enable him to learn and remember the entire oral law should not marry until he has studied it throughout. Included are all the laws and their motivating principles in a concise manner, the explanation of all 613 mitzvot together with the conditions governing their performance in details, and the specific points raised by the later sages. This is text that support studying the entire Torah. The whole Torah itself, as in whatever text we have, can actually be studied. Here the Alter Rebbe is saying that a person shouldn't get married until they study the whole Torah. Gemara and Mishnah and all these things. He should then marry and throughout his life engage in in-depth study and dialectical analysis according to the time and his capabilities. This approach is desirable because if he marries first, he'll have a millstone around his neck, as in be burdened with the concerns of providing for his wife and children, and will not be able to engage properly in Torah study to the same degree. He won't be able to learn and remember all the laws and their motivating principles, which are the interpretation of 613 mitzvot and the essence of the oral law. Dr. Rebbe is saying that a person should study the whole Torah first and then get married because that way throughout his life it will be more of a review. Versus if you wait, if the person gets married first, he's going to have so many responsibilities, he's not going to be able to go through the whole Torah. This study therefore supersedes the immense mitzvah to be fruitful and multiply, even though that is greater than all the mitzvot, provided one is not overcome by his natural inclination and can study without thoughts of sin. He would desire to marry only to fulfill the mitzvah to be fruitful and multiply. He is, however, exempt from that obligation, for it is superseded by the mitzvah of Torah study, which is equivalent to all the mitzvahs. The sages do not say that one should cease and interrupt the study of Torah to fulfill a commandment that cannot be fulfilled by others, as will be explained, except to make a short and temporary recess. One that nullifies only the commandment to constantly engage in the study of the Torah, but not one that nullifies the commandment to know the Torah thoroughly together with its explanation, i.e. all of its laws together with the concise grasp of motivating principles. In the Talmudic era, therefore, when boys of 10 would be taught Mishnah for 5 years, and then for 5 years they would be taught Talmud, i.e. a concise understanding of the motivating principles, as in the reasons, the motivating principles, the reason for all these things. If a person not married by age 20 20, he would have transgressed the mitzvah to be fruitful and multiply. The beginning of the time appropriate for a person to fulfill that mitzvah is 18, because even after marriage, he'll be able to study for 2 or 3 years without being greatly disturbed by financial worries until he has many children. So what the Alter Rebbe is just describing here, because again, remember the Maamar will throw out the references to things. So the Rebbe is saying a person can study the whole Torah, and he's like, oh, look, it even says it here in the Shulchan Aruch. And the Shulchan Aruch is saying that a man has a mitzvah to have children. Straight up commandment, be fruitful and multiply. The Alter Rebbe is saying that means you got to study the whole Torah before you get married and start having kids, because then you're going to have a lot of responsibilities. Oh, so then that means someone's not going to get married till they're 50. And the Alter Rebbe was like, no. Back in the day, at 10 years old, they studied Mishnah for 5 years. And then at the age of 15, they studied the whole Talmud for 5 years. Therefore, at least by age 20, he can get married. And even at 18, because those first 2 years, he's not going to have a bunch of kids. He might have one kid or something. But he's not going to have all these kids that he has to worry about. There's 2 points to this. One, we're seeing the fact that you could study the whole Torah, in a sense, that you could study the whole Talmud and Mishnah, you could understand the reasonings of all the laws and things like that. That's one point that it's bringing in. And then the other thing that we're looking at is that halacha itself has a halacha about Torah study, which you'll see in a little bit how this plays into the third aspect of things. Now, the Alter Rebbe referenced about how at the age of 10 they would study Mishnah, then at 15 they studied Talmud. So this is from Pirkei Avos. Pirkei Avos says this: Hoya Omer ben 5 shanim l'mikra, ben 10 l'mishnah, ben 13 l'mitzvot, ben 15 l'talmud, ben 18 l'chuppah, ben 20 l'nirdaf, ben 30 l'makoch, ben 40 l'bina, ben 50 l'etza, ben 6 l'zikna, ben 7 l'seva, ben 8 l'gvur, ben 9 l'shuach, ben 100 kilo mes v'avar bata menol. Yehuda ben Tema used to say, at 5 years of age, the study of scripture, as in you can start studying Tanakh at the age of 5. Part of why Rashi says my explanation will be understood by 5-year-old. At 10, the study of Mishnah. At 13, subject to the commandments, bar mitzvah. At 15, the study of Talmud. At 18, Bar Academy, getting married. At 20, for pursuit of livelihood. At 30, the peak of strength. At 40, wisdom. At 50, able to give counsel. At 60, old age. At 70, fullness of years. At 80, the age of strength. At 90, a bent body. At 100, as good as dead and gone completely out of the world. Well, 30, you're at the peak until 60, I think, officially is when it starts to taper off. That's why it says at 60, old age. Look, it's not a mandate, it's just a description of things. This is from the Gemara Nachos. This is a whole section in the Gemara now describing the idea that you could study the whole Torah as in there's some sort of parameters of Torah study. Because the first one we said we're only going to study practical halachos. The second level we said no, we could study the whole Torah regardless, but there's still a level higher than that. That's only considered the Elyon, not the Batul level, because the next level is just constant Torah study, which has no parameters in the sense that you're just studying Torah day and night. Eventually we'll see that there are some parameters to that. But the point is that the middle one is middle and not higher than that, because there's a measure of being able to study the whole Torah. Here, the Gemara is going to use the example of the Shulchan and the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash, called the Shulchan, the table, and that's where they put the 12 loaves of bread. I don't know if you ever saw a picture. They didn't look like loaves. They had a very interesting shape, almost like a Tetris piece. There were shelves that they would put it on, and it stayed warm from one week to the next. This is where the discussion comes in. The Mishnah teaches that according to Rabbi Yosei, even if the Kohen first removes the old showbread entirely and only then places the new showbread upon the table, this fulfills the requirement that the showbread always be on the table. So you always have to have the loaves of bread, the lachem apanim, always have to be on the shulchan, on the table. It's part of the service, basically, of the Beis HaMikdash. You must always have the bread there. So here they're describing, do you have to swap it quickly, or can they take off the old ones and then put on the new ones? Here in the Gemara, they talk about, yes, can you do that or not? So moreover, it is taught in a Breita, an early teaching. The Rabbi Yosei says, even if the Kohen removed the old showbread on the morning of Shabbat and arranged the new showbread toward evening, there's nothing wrong with that. Rather, how to reveal the meaning of the verse, and you shall set upon the table showbread before me always. So this is what the Torah says. This means that the table shall not be left overnight without bread upon it. This is how you'll see the evolution of a halacha now. They're talking about the showbread. They're talking about the lachem apanim on the table, the shulchan, in the Beis HaMikdash and the Mishkan. And the bread always has to be upon the table. I always have bread before me. So they're saying, what is that supposed to mean? So here they're saying it actually just means that you're not allowed to leave it overnight without bread upon it. So you could take off the old one first and then put on the new one. Not just that, but it could even be a gap of time. If you take one out in the morning and then you put the old one in the evening, that's still considered as if it's before me always. They're setting up a precedent to say if it's morning and night, even if there's a gap in between, that's still considered always. The Breita teaches that according to Rabbi Yosei, even if the old showbread remained on the table for a short while in the morning and the new showbread was placed on the table toward evening, and even though it did not reside constantly on the table, this fulfills the requirement that the showbread should always be on the table. Even if there's a gap, but if you hit morning and evening, and then the new bread is going to be there then for the next week, that's considered before me always. Rabbi Ami says, from Rabbi Yosei's statement, we may learn that even if a person learned only one chapter of the Mishnah in the morning and one chapter of the Mishnah in the evening, he has thereby fulfilled the mitzvah of this Torah scroll shall not depart from your mouth. And you should contemplate in it day and night, that you take heed to do according to all that is written in it. Then you shall make your ways prosperous, then you shall have good success. So if you're supposed to study Torah always, well, how can we study Torah always? So say, look at the law that we have here for the showbread. If you have morning and evening, that's considered always, even if there's a gap in between in the day. See how they took this law now and they're applying it to Torah study. Rabbi Yochanan says, in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, even if a person recited only the recitation of Shema in the morning and in the evening, he has fulfilled the mitzvah of this Torah scroll, shall not depart from your mouth. So Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says that even if you only say Shema morning and evening, meaning you've still fulfilled on some level this mitzvah of always studying Torah. And it is prohibited to state this matter in the presence of ignoramuses. It says they are likely to get the impression that there's no need to study Torah beyond this. So by the way, now that we just set upon this law, don't tell it to anybody because they're going to misunderstand it. And Rava says, on the contrary, it is a mitzvah to state this matter in the presence of ignoramuses, as they will realize that if merely reciting the Shema leads to such a great reward, all the more so how great is the reward of those who study Torah all day and night to you. I bless you that this Torah scroll shall not depart from your mouth. So first they're like, oh look, if you look according to the showbreads, if you look according to the Lechem Apanim, morning and evening counts as all day. And they say not just that, even if it's only Shema, morning and evening counts. And maybe don't tell this to people because they're going to totally misunderstand. The next rabbi comes in, Rava comes in, he says, no, tell this to people because they say, wow, the only thing you have to do is Shema in the morning, Shema in the evening. This is considered such a big deal and you get great reward for it. Then they're going to be like, maybe if I should study a little bit more, imagine how much greater everything will be. So he's saying use this as an incentive. That's really the reference, but I had to keep going with this because check this out. Ben Dama, son of Rabbi Yishmael's sister, asked Rabbi Yishmael, in the case of one such as I, who has learned the entire Torah, what is the halacha with regard to studying Greek wisdom? They're to go study the other philosophies around at the time. Rabbi Yishmael recited this verse about him. This Torah scroll shall not depart from your mouth, and you shall contemplate in it day and night. Go and search for an hour that is neither part of the day nor part of the night, and learn Greek wisdom in it. The Gemara notes, and this statement of Rabbi Yishmael disagrees with the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, as Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani says, that Rabbi Yonatan says, this verse is neither obligation nor mitzvah but a blessing. So here you see they've been using this verse of this Torah scroll, shall not depart from your mouth, that you should contemplate in it day and night, which we're actually going to get to in the next level. Here he's saying this is the obligation, day and night. So find a part of the day or night that's not day or night, and then you can study your Greek wisdom in it. The next rabbi, in the name of the name of the name of, comes in and says it's not an obligation, it's a blessing. It's a blessing to you. Rabbi Yonatan explains, the Holy One, blessed be he, saw Yehoshua, as in Joshua, or the leader Yehoshua, and observed that the words of Torah are very precious to him. As it is stated, and Hashem spoke to Moshe face to face, and his servant Yeshua ben Nun, a young man, did not depart from the tent. So one of the things that we say was exceptional about Yehoshua, about Joshua, is that he was so dedicated to Moshe that he was basically outside of his tent all day long. He was right on call there and just picking up and following Moshe around to get everything from him. So Yeshua was so dedicated to Moshe, did not depart from the tent. He was always there and ready. The Holy One, blessed be he, said, Yeshua, are the words of Torah so precious to you? I bless you that this Torah scroll shall not depart from your mouth. So see, he was taking this verse down. He's saying it's not just a matter of an obligation. It's a blessing that God gave him. Okay, see how much you treasure this. So should be the blessing to you. The Tana of the school of Rabbi Shmuel teaches the words of Torah should not be considered as an obligation upon you. One should not treat Torah study as a burden, but at the same time, you're not permitted to exempt yourself from them. See how this whole progression of things happens here. How they're taking one thing, they set a precedent with it, they apply it to another aspect of Torah, and then they go back and forth discussing that aspect, and then what have we ultimately ended off with is that the words of Torah are not a burden. Here it's saying it's not just a burden, it's a blessing to you. It's not some obligation that you're supposed to be dragging around with you. You can't exempt yourself from it, but there's a blessing in this also. That's what we ultimately come to.